Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to this event. My name is Madalina. I'm a scientist at Imperial College. And today I'm going to tell you about how we can be together while not being the same, learning from animals and how they self-organize in nature, from their swarm intelligence, and applying those ideas towards human collective intelligence and towards sharing wonderful collective experiences. Everywhere in nature, we see this collective behavior. It's pervasive. It's in small animals, in big animals, in insects, all over the place. And we have this very interesting behavior that emerges without central control, without any leader, without any pre-established kind of choreography. And from this behavior, we see a lot of incredibly important intelligence that is incredibly important for their survival. So for example, we see these termites. Termites are very small, and yet they can build these ginormous structures that are larger than an elephant. And fireflies, even though each of them blinks with like a random period and phase, when they all come together trying to communicate and to mate, they will synchronize at the same time. And their behavior is this behavior is really important for their survival. They wouldn't be able to mate otherwise. They wouldn't be able to eat otherwise. They wouldn't be able to protect themselves from predators. So we think that this behavior has evolved to protect these animals, which are weak when they are small and alone, but very strong when they are together. And this is called swarm intelligence, and the scientific practice of studying this collective behavior and how it emerges from the interactions of the components, especially in the animal kingdom. And one example of swarm intelligence, which is maybe the most easy to understand, is the behavior of moving together. So this collective motion, we see it in birds, we see it in fish, we see it in all sorts of insects, in herd animals, and it has all sorts of different functions, but it really represents something very important to the animals beyond just the fact that they're moving together. For example, in this cyclone of reindeer that you see here, the kids of all of the reindeers are sitting in the middle and they're being protected by all the others who are just like walking in a circle. In the case of birds or of fish, the fact that they move together like this is not just to efficiently forage or to migrate, but is also for play, because a lot of these birds are known to interact and to fly together with other birds that they constantly spend time with. So when scientists are looking at this, every time they notice the same social networks in the animals. So this is a zebrafish. Let me tell you a little bit more about how scientists are trying to figure out how animals do this. Zebrafish can live in big groups or in small groups, and they're being studied quite a lot at the Institute of Collective Behavior at the Max Planck Research Institute. And scientists have been using a very interesting setup to study these fish. This is a state-of-the-art technology. This is a virtual reality tank. And the fish is little in the middle over there alone, but it swims around all sorts of virtual fish, which are modeled by the scientists so that they move in a specific way. And above this virtual reality tank, there's a very interesting device which performs neural images and which can actually observe the individual neurons or small groups of neurons firing in the brains of the fish. And based on this, they're trying to see how does the fish behave and how does its brain respond to the movements of these virtual fish. And scientists were able to make a model of how this happens, and they identify the exact brain circuitry, which makes this mathematical computation so that the real fish is actually aligning its direction with the average direction of its two closest neighbors, which have been modeled in VR. And this really confirms findings that we've seen for like the last 20 years or so. For example, in the study of how fish are trying to avoid predators and how just by working together and synchronizing their movements with their nearest neighbors, they can move like a whole organism as if they were all one. And they can trick animals that are so much bigger and protect themselves from predators. And these findings have been seen in birds as well. So in the University of Rome, there's been a lot of research done together with Nobel Prize winner Giorgio Paresi, who is a physicist. Physicists have been working together with biologists in order to study and to measure the behavior of birds. And we see that the birds do a similar thing to the fish, but instead of coordinating with 2 neighbors, they coordinate with maybe 6 or 7 nearest neighbors. So they have more social capacity, which also produces much more collective behavior. But there's not just movement that animals do together in a very clever way. There's also a sense of collective computation. So these guys, they're called slime molds. They're very interesting organisms. They're neither slimes nor mold, but they are acellular. So they can be both unicellular organisms or combine themselves together and become a multicellular organism at different times in their lives. For example, when they're mating. And when they combine together, they can exchange the information that they have collected alone, and they can all individually use the findings of the others. And for example, they can solve mazes by doing that. They would spread out, they would explore the whole maze, and then when they come back together, they form the shortest path solution to finding the food in the maze. And this is really interesting because they're clearly cleverer than I am. If I was given a traveling salesman problem for a programming interview, I would not be able to solve it. But these things can, even though they're unicellular organisms, just by working together. And even more, scientists at the Tokyo Institute of Technology have been using these slime molds to test how optimal their transport network is. And they found out that when the slime mold is spreading around towards food, which is placed in the same place as various train stations would be placed on the map, they construct a network, a transport network, which then civil engineers can use to improve the current transport network and make it more efficient. And finally, we turn to ants. These are pharaoh ants. They've been studied very thoroughly at the University of Bristol. And these pharaoh ants are doing a very interesting kind of knowledge alignment. They know how to make decisions together, and they have a sort of democracy that in some ways is even more flexible and more advanced than most democracies that we see today in human society. Thanks to developments in technology, we can now attach RFID chips on each ant and then study where they move and what they do. And based on these studies, people have found out a little bit about how ants make decisions. Basically, each ant will go and explore around. Let's say the ants are trying to move to a new nest. They're considering, a new home. And each of them has explored, has found maybe a new nest, and then they come back and they emit some chemicals. Each ant then perceives the concentration of chemicals, and from this collective emissions of chemicals, they figure out whether they want to go or to stay. But what's really interesting is that this depends on how much danger the colony currently is in. If the colony is under great danger, say someone has sprayed with pesticides, they're not going to wait for everyone to agree. As soon as 50% of the ants agree, as soon as the concentration has reached 50%, they're going to pack up and go. But if they're actually in a relaxed state, there is no threat, and they've just discovered a better place, then they will wait up until everyone agrees. And only after everyone's agreed, they will move. So scientists call this consensus reaching with a flexible quorum threshold. So instead of always giving the vote to the 51%, what is the majority is proportional to how much danger there is to be mitigated. Now, what about human self-organization? Well, historically, we tend to think that humans are not really like that. They don't self-organize. They follow what other people tell them. A little bit like how, people have thought for a very long time that ants behave in the same way as the British people. They do what the Queen says. But that's not really the case. There are so many situations where human self-organization comes from similar behaviors as we see in the animals. So, for example, in ritual practice, they follow rules, they follow all sorts of social norms which remind us of the rules that the fish and the birds use to align with their neighbors. Similarly, in improvisational dancing, for example, we have a case of self-organizing collective movement in which each dancer responds to those around them. In the cinema, of course, people respond to what they see and they feel connected to each other. And of course, in sports events, we have this extraordinary phenomenon of the wave where everyone stands up and people stand up as they see their neighbor stand up, and you see this wave that propagates through the audience. An example where this has been very thoroughly studied, where people and animals are very similar, are pedestrian flows. And we've all walked around on Oxford Street, we've all gone to the tube, and this very interesting thing happens where people will go in different directions, they will not knock into each other, and people will move forward and backward and will get where they need to get, even though it seems like it's such a complicated problem. You don't need to know where everyone else is going. You should just pay attention to your neighbors, not knock into them, and so on. The kind of behavior that we've seen in the slime molds also reminds us of some interesting ideas of knowledge alignment. For example, in the case of Athenian democracy, a number of sociologists and scientists, such as Ober, talk about this idea of knowledge alignment and how the Athenian democracy was so advanced at the time because instead of having the decisions taken by one king or one general, the decisions were taken collectively following a lot of debate. And the more argument there was, the more opportunities for knowledge alignment, the more opportunities to discuss, the more opportunities to debate, and to take more flexible solutions to collective problems. And finally, which reminds me a little bit of the ants, recent archaeological work by Graeber and Waingrow shows and suggests that it's possible that when the European colonists arrived in North America, the local Native American tribes were the ones who thought that the Europeans were the ones who are uncivilized because all of their property belonged to a king, and this king would tell them what to do. That didn't seem progressive at all. Meanwhile, these societies would switch. For example, in the summer, where there were a lot of resources, they would simply act in a self-organized fashion and share everything with each other. But in the winter, where it was more dangerous and there was more scarcity, they would actually elect the tribe elders or the strongest people who would then distribute the food and protect the village from wild animals and so on. So you observe this flexibility of political and social organization, which is based on how threatening the situation is, similar to how the ants were doing. So clearly, we do have what it takes to self-organize and solve problems collectively together. And basically, there's a lot of research that shows that we can individually relate to other people in a very similar way to how the animals do it. So for example, when we're all together at a concert, our heartbeats can synchronize. When we're all listening to the same music, our brainwaves synchronize. When we are walking together in the same direction with a group of people, like in a protest, we do feel more socially connected to others. And there's been a lot of interesting research, for example, even in the classroom, which shows that children who play a game in which they imitate each other's movements are then better at doing all sorts of educational tasks. They learn words easier and they do better in tests and they collaborate better in groups just by doing this initial synchrony exercise. So based on all of these ideas, we propose an experimental practice, a new experimental idea for collective problem solving in human beings with motions, and we call this SYNCH.LIVE. And it looks a little bit like this. You have a group of people, they're sitting in the dark, they're wearing these blinking light hats, which we've all built. They are inspired by how fireflies synchronize with each other. And the idea is that these hats are responding to a camera that is placed on the top and that is measuring how collectively they move. And we tell the people that they have to synchronize their lights without talking, without touching, and just by moving around and working together. And by setting the problem up in this way, we are encouraging people to pay attention to everyone else, because in order to observe whether something is synchronized or not, you can't look at yourself, you can't look at just one other person, you have to look at everyone. So this collective distributed attention and collective feedback mechanism can maybe teach us more about collective problem solving. And as we can see in this group, this is a group who has managed to succeed in this task. They have managed to synchronize all of their lights while walking together in a circle in a very similar way to the reindeer and the fish that you've seen earlier. And not only did most of the groups succeed, so we had 16 groups of 10 people try this experimentally, 11 of them succeeded and managed to solve the collective task and synchronize their lights. And when we asked them about how they achieved this and about their strategies and whether they were aware of their strategies, many people reported that they figured out they have to follow their neighbors and to be together with everyone else. But also the people who reported being more confident and being more aware of their strategies were more likely to be inside a winning group. So this tells us actually that it's not enough for everyone to be the same and to follow others. A mixture between initiative and working together with others, this interesting interplay between the intrinsic drives of each person, which may be competitive or selfish, and the collective drives of connecting to another, which are cooperative and pro-social. These conflicting tendencies are what create the most interesting and collectively intelligent behavior. And even more, when asked about how they felt, a lot of people reported that they felt happier. The ones who have succeeded in synchronizing their lights and have spent 10 minutes or so paying attention to the others and moving together with them reported feeling more connected to others and reported a lot of feelings of togetherness, of amusement, of empathy, of curiosity, and just generally a sense of positive outcomes. So this gives us a very exciting relationship between how animals would move, solve problems collectively, and how we can apply this to human behavior. I guess what we found out is that it's very, very important to pay attention to your neighbor, that collective behavior is the result of local interactions between agents, and as such, if you hug your neighbor and your neighbor hugs their neighbor, in the end, we will end up with what you see in this image, which is the Guinness World Record for the biggest hug. So the message is, you know, pay attention to the ones around you, but also have confidence in your own values and your own initiative. Create stronger bonds with the ones that are next to you. Be there in person with them, because you will then be able to synchronize your minds, your hearts, your eyes, and your dance moves. And we will make the world a better place. I would like to finish by thanking all my collaborators, because this is a collective intelligence project. And also, if you would like to learn more, you can even try this experiment, and you can read more about it in our research. And of course, I have to thank all the participants and all the people who have helped me test this technology, without whom, you know, nothing could have been possible. There is really no we without everyone else. Thank you very much.